Welcome back for this week's episode of Papal Profiles. This profile will investigate the papacy of one of the most retrograde popes of the modern era, Pius X. When modern Catholics talk about the good old days, odds are they're thinking of a world shaped, knowingly or not, by Pope Pius X. Elected in 1903, Pius X is remembered as the pope who declared all-out war on modernism, centralized papal power even more tightly, and became the spiritual godfather of today's most infamous retrograde traditionalists, the Society of St. Pius X. But his election starts in a very old-world moment. The conclave which elected Pius X was the last in which European monarchs exercised their traditional right of exclusion to instruct the cardinals of their realm not to vote for a specific candidate. At the 1903 conclave, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria invoked jus exclusivae to block the frontrunner, Cardinal Rampolla, Leo XIII's Secretary of State, deemed by Austria to be too friendly toward France. The veto worked. Rampolla's support evaporated, and the cardinals pivoted to a compromise candidate, the mild-mannered pastoral Giuseppe Sarto, Pius X. Once elected, Pius X immediately eliminated that embarrassing secular power. In the 1904 papal bull Commissum Nobis, he banned any interference in conclaves, threatening excommunication to any cardinal who dared entertain a veto again. His predecessors, Pius IX and Leo XIII, lit the fuse, but Pius X detonated the anti-modernist bomb. Across Europe, Catholic scholars were beginning to use historical criticism, archaeology, philology, and philosophical inquiry to understand Scripture and church history. To Pius X, this wasn't scholarship, it was sedition. In 1907, he issued the syllabus, with truly lamentable results, containing 65 modernist errors. Among these were several factual statements that we now know are true. It specifically condemned propositions suggesting biblical texts evolved through editing and weren't directly divinely inspired in their final form, church dogmas could change meaning over time or were historically conditioned, the Church's magisterium should submit to historical and scientific scholarship, Christ's divinity and resurrection were later theological developments rather than historical facts, and the sacraments originated from the apostles' interpretation rather than the ministry of Jesus. Condemning reality was only step one. 2 months later came the nuclear option in the encyclical Feeding the Lord's Flock on the doctrines of the modernists, a sweeping condemnation portraying modernists as the greatest threat the Church had ever faced. The encyclical is severe and uncompromising, calling modernism the synthesis of all heresies. Its enforcement led to a period of intense suspicion, with numerous scholars dismissed, silenced, or forced to recant. It was a 20th century syllabus of errors, with more paranoia and fewer footnotes. Pius X accused scholars of subordinating faith to science and of twisting Scripture with profane novelties. He denounced their methods, motives, and even their character, ironically doing exactly what he accused them of, condemning authors without reading them, misrepresenting positions, and policing thought. And he concluded by prescribing the cure, full immersion in scholasticism. Quote, "There is no surer sign that a man is on the way to modernism than when he begins to show his dislike for this scholastic system." End quote. Also, loyalty tests and the removal of any teacher, professor, or priest who showed even a hint of modernist tendencies. Suspicion was enough to end a career. Writings by respected Catholic scholars were placed on the index of prohibited books. Loyally retrograde faculty were promoted. Anyone else was purged. And in 1910, Pius X capped the crusade with the Oath Against Modernism, forcing clergy to swear allegiance to all these censures, an oath only abolished by Pope Paul VI in 1967. For a pope so committed to enforcing unity, Pius X inadvertently became the banner for some of Rome's most rebellious children. I'm talking, of course, about the Society of St. Pius X, the SSPX, founded in 1970 by the renegade Archbishop Lefebvre. The SSPX sees itself as the heir to Pius X's fight against modern errors. But their interpretation of defending tradition has drifted into schism-adjacent territory. rejecting Vatican II reforms, resisting papal authority, and operating as a kind of breakaway traditionalist ecosystem. In their own words, the Society's objective is the formation of holy priests, but what they mean is priests trained explicitly against the teachings and reforms of the modern Church. They hold up Pius X as the model of true Catholic resistance, imagining him as the anti-modernist pope who would have thundered against every innovation since 1962. The irony is thick. A pope who demanded absolute obedience from clergy is now the rallying point for a movement defined by selective obedience, parallel structures, and a not-so-subtle rejection of Rome's authority. Pius X didn't intend to create a schismatic legacy, but when you elevate rigidity to a virtue and treat development as corruption, you leave a theological vacuum that groups like the SSPX are all too happy to fill. Pius X has been canonized, venerated, and held up by traditionalists as the gold standard of papal courage, but historically, his pontificate reads less like heroic resistance and more like a defensive panic. He fought the wrong enemies, he silenced the very scholars who could have strengthened Catholic intellectual life, and his anti-modernist crusade scorched the landscape for decades. Yet, his influence endures, most visibly in those who loudly claim him as their patron while resisting the very ecclesial unity he demanded. In the end, Pius X didn't stop modernity, but he did shape the battle lines of Catholic identity for decades, right up to the SSPX chapels still insisting that the world stopped in 1914. Thanks for watching. Please check out the other videos on my channel if history is your thing, and see you next time.